In Birmingham, Alabama, the hum of the city rarely masks violence on this scale. A mother, her child, and her partner gunned down in their car in broad daylight. 3 lives ended with the same brutal efficiency as gang violence, yet no ties to that world. It's the kind of crime that doesn't just leave behind grief, it fractures the perceived safety of a neighborhood. The first responders to Echo Highlands Park that July afternoon didn't know they were stepping into a triple homicide. The emergency call came from the car's collision alert system, flagging what seemed like a routine accident, but routine ended at the driver's side door. Arkia Berry, 28 years old, Eric Ashley Jr., also 28, and Landon Brooks, 5. The impact had veered their blue Nissan Maxima off the road, but it wasn't the crash that killed them. It was bullets. Over 24 casings scattered across the scene, all fired in rapid succession, leaving a mess of shattered glass and silence. Forensics later confirmed each fatal wound came from a 9mm semi-automatic, standard in street-level disputes, but this wasn't about drugs, gangs, or retaliation. This was personal. The bodies were positioned unnaturally. Eric slumped over the wheel, Arkia halfway between the front and back seats as if she'd lunged instinctively toward her son. Landon remained strapped in his booster seat, lifeless. One forensic technician noted that despite the multiple entry wounds in the vehicle's frame, the grouping of shots was deliberate, tight clusters, suggesting practiced aim rather than chaos. But what shifted the investigation from procedural to personal was a text. Arkia, moments before her death, had typed out a single name, Jacko. It was sent to a close friend, time-stamped mere minutes before the first bullet. The question wasn't just who pulled the trigger, but why Arkia knew to send that name. Birmingham PD, accustomed to tracing gun violence through street informants and retaliatory cycles, hit a wall. The victims had no active criminal affiliations, no recent disputes. But that name, Jacko, was enough to trigger a background check that flagged Jacorian Deshaun McGregor, 25 years old, prior arrests for minor drug offenses. No known connections to Berry or Ashley, at least not on paper. The detective leading the case, seasoned in homicides but wearied by their routine patterns, reviewed the text repeatedly. Sometimes it's not what they say, it's the timing that matters, he remarked. The message arrived too late to save Arkia, but it served as her final statement, the only one she'd leave behind. Physical evidence gathered from the scene was overwhelming in volume but sparse in direction. 27 shell casings, no fingerprints on the vehicle exterior, no eyewitnesses forthcoming in a neighborhood wary of police interaction. Yet the volume of gunfire, 24 rounds, suggested a calculated act, not a random burst of rage. The clustering of shots, the precision, pointed towards someone familiar with handling a weapon under pressure. In procedural homicide work, the initial 72 hours are critical, but in this case, no viable suspects surfaced in that window. Aside from the cryptic Yako, surveillance footage from nearby traffic lights offered little. One angle captured a dark-colored vehicle speeding away, too far for plate recognition, but its profile matched a Kia Soul. That clue, thin as it was, marked the first forensic thread to follow. Investigators canvassed local car theft reports. 2 days after the shooting, a green Kia Soul was found burned out on the city's outskirts, stripped of anything identifiable. VIN scratched off. The burn pattern suggested accelerants were used, intentional destruction of evidence. This vehicle became the next node in the chain, linking McGregor indirectly through circumstantial gaps. But circumstantial wasn't enough. Forensics logged each layer, ballistic trajectories aligning with the driver's side of the Kia, casing patterns indicating the shooter fired from a stationary position outside the Maxima, soot residue clustering near the back left wheel well, evidence of discharge angles. These details would later shape the prosecution's argument, but at this stage, left more questions than answers. Detectives revisited Arkia's digital footprint, searching for any interaction with McGregor. Phone records revealed no direct calls, no financial transactions, no social media connections that stood out. It was the silence between these data points that spoke volumes. The lead investigator reviewing the clean gaps muttered, "The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that's the problem." By the end of the first week, public interest in the case spiked, fueled by local media reports of a mother and child murdered with no clear motive. Candlelight vigils were held. Faces of Arkia, Eric, and Landon flickered across television screens, reminders of lives interrupted. But for Birmingham PD, the investigation remained tangled. The text, the burned-out Kia, and a suspect whose name floated at the edge of evidence, but never quite in the center. The next steps required what every solid homicide case hinges on: forensic validation. The bodies of Arkia Berry, Eric Ashley Jr., and 5-year-old Landon Brooks arrived at the Jefferson County Coroner's Office less than 6 hours after the crime scene was secured. In a homicide investigation, the autopsy isn't just procedure. It's often the first objective layer of evidence. No speculation, no hearsay, just facts carved into tissue and bone. Deputy Coroner Dr. Angela Rowe oversaw the examination. She was seasoned, methodical, known for her precision. Her preliminary notes, logged at 6:47 a.m., cataloged 3 distinct profiles: adult female, adult male, and juvenile male. Time of death estimated between 2 p.m. and 2:15 p.m., consistent with the timestamp from the car's collision alert and Arkia's final text message. Immediate cause of death for each: multiple gunshot wounds. Eric Ashley Jr. presented with 5 entry wounds, 3 to the chest, 2 in the left arm, defensive posture implied. Bullet trajectory suggested he turned toward the source, possibly shielding himself or the passengers. All rounds were consistent with 9mm ammunition. 1 lodged round was recovered intact from his thoracic cavity and logged as forensic exhibit #17BA. Arkia Berry's body revealed 4 entry wounds: 2 to the right side of the torso, 1 to the shoulder, and a grazing wound along the forearm. The positioning of her injuries indicated she turned back, likely reaching toward the rear seat at the time of the shooting. 1 slug was retrieved from soft tissue near the hip, filed under exhibit #18BA. Notably, there were small contusions on her palms, consistent with bracing against interior surfaces during the barrage. Landon Brooks, juvenile male, 5 years old, showed 2 entry wounds: 1 fatal shot to the upper chest, another to the thigh. Both rounds passed through the child's body, exiting cleanly into the car's upholstery. Autopsy confirmed he remained strapped in his booster seat at the time of the attack. No defensive wounds were present. Toxicology returned negative for all 3. No alcohol, no drugs, no physiological conditions that would have impaired or contributed to their deaths. This was execution-style violence, uncomplicated and absolute. The angle of the gunfire told its own story. Forensic trajectory mapping, cross-referenced with ballistic data from the scene, confirmed a shooter standing at the driver's side front quarter panel, firing downward and into the cabin. The clustering of shots toward the driver's chest, the lateral grouping across Arkia's torso, and the lower angled entries into the rear seat, each consistent with a shooter moving alongside the vehicle while discharging rounds. The forensic team plotted the line of fire as deliberate, controlled. No erratic spray, no sign of panic. Whoever held the weapon knew how to manage recoil and pace. The recovered slugs, intact and fragmented, underwent rifling analysis, standard lands and grooves pattern, indicative of a mass-market 9mm semi-automatic pistol, likely a Glock or similar variant. But absent a registered weapon, it was a dead end, at least for now. The autopsy reports painted a grim but coherent picture. A shooter advanced on the vehicle from the driver's side, emptied a magazine with methodical intent, ensuring no survivor. The bodies corroborated the crime scene evidence without contradiction. And in procedural homicide, alignment between physical evidence and forensic pathology is a rare moment of certainty. But in this case, there were no signs of struggle outside the vehicle, no evidence of forced entry, no defensive marks beyond the superficial wounds on Eric's arm. The victims were caught unaware, their last moments locked inside that Nissan Maxima, windows rolled up, their world collapsing in seconds. The coroner's office filed the formal cause of death for all 3 as homicide by firearm. Case files were logged and dispatched to Birmingham PD's homicide unit by noon the next day. This stage of the investigation left little to debate about how the crime occurred. The why, however, remained distant. Too clean, too surgical for a street-level hit. The forensic pattern aligned too neatly with the ballistic spread. One detective noted in his report, "Precision like this? It's personal or practiced." If the evidence was supposed to speak, it had spoken clearly, but the message still lacked context. The next step wasn't about gathering more data, it was about connecting the forensic dots to the shooter's motive. The autopsy didn't just confirm murder, it narrowed the scope of intent. The forensic trail inside the car had been mapped. Blood patterns, ballistic trajectories, recovered slugs, all confirmed a close-range targeted shooting. Yet outside the vehicle, there remained gaps. Any homicide investigation in an urban setting leans heavily on surveillance. Cameras mounted on streetlights, storefronts, residential doorbells, all potentially silent witnesses. In Birmingham, like many mid-sized cities, the network was patchy, but investigators worked with what they had. The first video recovered came from a traffic camera, positioned at the intersection nearest to Echo Highlands Park. It timestamped 2:12 p.m., the estimated time of the shooting. A green Kia Soul entered the frame, moving quickly. The vehicle didn't stop at the intersection. It didn't match the speed of typical neighborhood traffic either. The model and color aligned with the burned-out Kia found days later in the outskirts of Birmingham. Plate recognition failed. Too distant, too much motion blur. But the profile of the vehicle was clear enough for cross-referencing. The forensics unit extracted additional footage from 2 residential cameras facing the side streets feeding into the park. One clip captured a brief flash of the same green Kia turning sharply, the shape consistent with the earlier traffic footage. No facial IDs, no clear driver features, but the route pattern now became established. Data pulled from city surveillance logs placed the vehicle traveling northeast from the park, exiting onto a service road heading toward an industrial area. This narrowed the window of time the suspect vehicle remained active in public view, approximately 11 minutes from the time of the shooting to when the vehicle vanished from camera coverage. That service road led toward the area where the burned Kia was later found, incinerated beyond recognition. Vehicle forensics on the burned-out Kia offered partial confirmation. The make, model, and manufacturing year matched those seen on camera. The car's VIN had been scraped off with a grinding tool, an intentional effort to obliterate traceability. The interior had been torched thoroughly, accelerants detected in the burn pattern, suggesting an attempt to destroy DNA, prints, or fiber evidence. Yet one key element survived the fire: the frame stamp, a secondary VIN engraved onto the chassis for insurance and manufacturing purposes. It confirmed ownership. The registered owner had reported the car stolen 48 hours before the shooting. This individual had no criminal record and no known connections to any of the victims. The investigation pivoted from physical tracking to digital forensics. Cellular tower logs became the next layer. Triangulation from the area at the time of the shooting pulled up a dozen active devices within range. Filtering out non-mobile signals, only 3 devices registered consistent movement matching the suspect vehicle's path. One of those devices belonged to the registered Kia owner, but they were located across town during the incident, confirmed by a retail store receipt time-stamped during the window. That left 2 other device IDs. One dropped from the grid 10 minutes after the shooting. The other stayed active, its location data bouncing between neighboring towers, before eventually shutting off near the industrial outskirts where the burned Kia was recovered. Investigators cross-referenced those device IDs against known persons of interest, including the name in Arkia Berry's final message, Jacko. The second device ID tied back to Jacorian McGregor's registered phone, but there was no direct ping at the shooting site. His device reactivated 2 hours later in a different sector of Birmingham. Investigators flagged this as deliberate evasion, typical in cases where suspects attempt to minimize digital exposure during key time frames. McGregor's device going dark immediately after the murder, only to reappear hours later, raised clear suspicions. But this wasn't hard proof, only a digital absence. Meanwhile, ballistic forensics returned the rifling characteristics of the recovered bullets. They confirmed the rounds came from a Glock-pattern pistol, one of the most common handguns in circulation. No recovered weapon yet meant no direct link between those rounds and any suspect. The chain of surveillance, though fragmented, formed a rough outline. A green Kia Soul traced from the park to the outskirts of town, a phone going dark along the same route, a car burned out with VIN tampering, a name texted moments before death, yet no clear visual ID, no murder weapon. One detective, reviewing the compiled surveillance data, noted in his report, "The absence of evidence isn't absence of action. The phone went dead where the car was burned. That's a sequence." The investigation remained procedural but tightened. Forensics had established movement. The next step required matching those movements to motive. July 17, 2024. 4 days after the triple homicide, Birmingham PD's homicide unit met with the department's digital forensics team for a full case sync. The investigation had its physical map, the bodies, the bullet trajectories, the burned Kia Soul, but the digital footprint still required excavation. Phones don't just carry calls and texts, they log patterns, GPS trails, message fragments. If a suspect had been deliberate about covering tracks, digital forensics could expose those gaps just as easily as the data itself. The priority device for analysis was Arkia Berry's cell phone. The text message with the name Jacko was already in evidence, but investigators needed the wider context: recent calls, deleted texts, app messages. The forensic extraction, run through Celebrate software, recovered the last 7 days of communications, including deleted content. Arkia's phone log showed no direct calls to Jacorian McGregor in the week before the murder. No social media connections were active between them. But a string of deleted text messages 2 days prior surfaced. The messages originated from an unknown number, one not saved in Arkia's contacts, discussing a meeting point, vague references to resolving things, and the final line, "We can talk face to face." The number matched one previously registered to McGregor, though he had changed SIM cards weeks before. This indirect digital connection deepened when Eric Ashley Jr.'s phone records were analyzed. His device showed multiple calls exchanged with that same number over a 3-week period leading up to the shooting. Conversations clustered around financial topics, with message fragments referencing a drop and settling. The phrasing triggered the attention of detectives familiar with narcotics exchanges, but neither Eric nor Arkia had active criminal records or known associations with trafficking networks. To verify, investigators requested financial transaction histories for both victims. Eric's recent banking activity flagged a withdrawal of $2,000 made in cash 2 days before the murders. No matching deposits, no electronic trail, just the withdrawal and a subsequent spike in phone activity with the number linked to McGregor. At this point, the digital timeline solidified. 2 days before the shooting, cash withdrawn, texts exchanged about a meeting, a phone number linked to McGregor involved. On the day of the murder, no calls made, but Arkia's final message pinpointed the same alias, Jacko. Her device showed no other outgoing communications after the text was sent. Forensics also recovered partial data from the green Kia Soul's onboard diagnostics. Modern vehicles log basic telemetry, even when stolen. The recovered ECU, engine control unit, though damaged, retained fragments of trip data. GPS coordinates placing the car within Echo Highlands Park on July 13 between 1:50 p.m. and 2:15 p.m. The system also logged a hard acceleration event immediately following the shooting window, consistent with eyewitness timelines. These coordinates aligned with the traffic camera footage that first captured the Kia fleeing the area. Another layer surfaced through triangulated tower data. While McGregor's primary phone had powered down near the outskirts where the burned Kia was recovered, a secondary device, burner phone activity, registered brief pings along the same route before cutting off. This secondary line, unregistered and untraceable to McGregor directly, fit the suspect's pattern of minimizing exposure. Cross-referencing both devices' activity windows further narrowed the window for suspect movement. But digital evidence is only as strong as its corroboration. The investigation team summarized the digital profile: Eric Ashley Jr.'s phone, multiple calls and texts to a number formerly registered to McGregor. Arkia Berry's phone, deleted messages referencing a meeting, final text naming Jacko. Burned Kia Soul telemetry, places the vehicle at the crime scene. Device triangulation. Suspect's phone and burner both follow the path of the fleeing Kia. In homicide work, alignment between physical and digital forensics creates prosecutable threads. But at this stage, no direct message, no camera footage, and no eyewitness placed McGregor in the Kia during the crime. His legal defense, if challenged in court, could argue the absence of real-time location data and eyewitness verification. Still, the circumstantial weight increased. One detective reviewing the digital logs noted, "The pattern is consistent, but it's all around the edges, close but not yet centered." The investigation shifted focus again, this time toward leveraging witness interviews and background profiling to tie these digital shadows into motive. July 20th, 2024. 6 days after the homicide, investigators pivoted from data streams and forensic reconstructions to the more unpredictable realm of human testimony. With digital evidence circling McGregor, but not anchoring him at the crime scene, detectives sought to fill in the personal history, specifically the connections between McGregor and Eric Ashley Jr. The assumption was simple: the deeper the social ties, the clearer the motive. The first productive lead came through Eric's financial records. Prior deposits and withdrawals over the past 3 months were consistent, But a notable shift emerged 6 weeks before the murders. Irregular cash movements, small but steady, suggesting side income. Eric's employer verified stable work hours and pay, eliminating his primary job as the source of these extra funds. Detectives turned to Eric's known associates. A pattern surfaced. Names recurring across Eric's contact list and social circles also appeared in McGregor's background. One individual, a low-level street dealer arrested 3 months prior, connected both men socially. This link wasn't criminal in itself, but positioned McGregor and Eric within overlapping circles, enough to warrant further exploration. Interviews began with family and friends, establishing timelines and gauging whether the victims mentioned any threats or tensions. Eric's sister recounted overhearing her brother on the phone 2 weeks prior, arguing about a cut and demanding someone make it right. She couldn't name the other party, but the timing aligned with the uptick in cash withdrawals from Eric's account. The conversations, according to her, were infrequent but heated, an unusual tone for Eric. Next, investigators re-examined the deleted texts recovered from Eric's phone. One sequence, dated 10 days before the homicide, referenced meeting at the lot. The contact number aligned with McGregor's former line, the same number tied to Arkia's deleted messages. The lot, based on follow-up interviews, was a known meetup point at an abandoned gas station on the outskirts of town, previously flagged in narcotics cases, but dormant for months. Surveillance footage from the gas station, while sparse, provided time-stamped images. 10 days before the murders, a green Kia Soul appeared at the location. The vehicle remained parked for approximately 20 minutes before departing. No usable facial imagery captured, but the make and model once again aligned with the burned vehicle from the crime scene. Detectives formalized the relationship. Eric and McGregor shared intermittent dealings tied to cash exchanges. The sums weren't large enough to suggest significant trafficking, but pointed toward small-scale disputes. Motive, at this stage, leaned toward a personal fallout over money, likely tied to unresolved transactions. Arkia's connection remained less defined. Interviews with her coworkers painted her as uninvolved in Eric's side dealings. But as Eric's partner, she would have been a witness to financial strain or external pressures. One coworker recalled Arkia mentioning a meeting that couldn't wait on the morning of July 13th, aligning with the scheduled encounter that preceded the shooting. A final piece came through a confidential informant, previously arrested on unrelated charges, but active within the same circles. The informant disclosed that McGregor had been pressed for repayment over a missing amount, roughly $2,000, the same amount Eric withdrew days before his death. This corroborated the financial movements already mapped. For investigators, the timeline clarified. Cash disputes between Eric and McGregor surfaced weeks prior, multiple meetings at a known exchange location, escalation evidenced by heated conversations and financial inconsistencies. But without a direct statement or a recorded threat, the connection remained circumstantial. The case's strength lay in layering these elements with forensic patterns already established. One detective, summarizing the growing profile, noted, "No random act, too many touch points. But motive needs to close the distance to the weapon." As interviews wrapped, the focus turned to aligning witness timelines with forensic evidence, tightening the window between the last known interactions and the homicide. By the 8th day of the investigation, Birmingham PD had constructed a circumstantial frame around Ja'Cory and McGregor. The forensic groundwork, ballistics, digital tracking, vehicle telemetry, aligned with motive elements uncovered through financial records and social connections. What remained was the logistical consolidation, matching suspect movements with forensic data points and eliminating alternative scenarios. Investigators initiated a comprehensive timeline audit. Starting from the day of the homicide, they cross-referenced traffic camera logs, cell tower pings, and the last known locations of both the victims and McGregor. Surveillance placed the green Kia Soul within Echo Highlands Park between 1:50 p.m. and 2:15 p.m. on July 13th. Telemetry confirmed the vehicle's acceleration from the area immediately following the estimated time of death. McGregor's primary phone powered down at 1:48 p.m. Prior to that, cell tower logs placed it approximately 2 miles from the park. His reactivated signal at 4:35 p.m. registered in a different quadrant of Birmingham, far from the burned vehicle recovery site. This left a 2-hour window unaccounted for. Detectives reconstructed the suspect's likely route using automated license plate recognition, ALPR, data. which captured the green Kia Soul at an intersection 5 minutes from the park at 2:05 p.m. The next ALPR hit occurred on a service road leading out of Birmingham, time-stamped at 2:22 p.m. Investigators compared this with the cell tower data from McGregor's secondary burner device, which briefly pinged in the same service road corridor before dropping off-grid. Forensic analysis on the burned Kia Soul produced one usable trace: melted fragments of a prepaid phone SIM card found beneath the driver's seat, partially shielded from the fire. While the card itself was damaged beyond retrieval, the International Mobile Subscriber Identity (IMSI) number remained partially legible. Database checks confirmed this IMSI matched the burner phone pings associated with McGregor's movement on July 13th. This tied the vehicle not just to the crime scene, but to the same device operating within McGregor's digital profile. The burn pattern analysis of the vehicle suggested accelerant use focused on the cabin area, leaving the undercarriage, where the SIM fragment was found, less exposed to direct flame. The accelerant was identified as gasoline, consistent with field reports from the vehicle recovery team. Parallel to this, detectives verified McGregor's alibi. During initial questioning, he claimed to have been at a friend's apartment across town during the time frame in question. The friend, under sworn statement, corroborated this but wavered under follow-up inquiry. Cell tower logs placed the friend's device at the apartment, but McGregor's primary phone was absent from that zone during the critical 2-hour gap. A third-party witness, unconnected to the victims or suspect, reported seeing a man matching McGregor's description leaving the area near the burned Kia site around 3 p.m. No photographic evidence supported this, but the account matched the timeline. Investigators compiled the following alignment: Kia Soul placed at the park during the murder window. Burner phone tied to McGregor traveled along the same route. Melted SIM card fragment recovered from the burned vehicle matched burner IMSI. Suspect's primary device powered off during the homicide, reactivated hours later in a different sector. The forensic sequencing closed the logistical gap. Circumstantial threads, burner phone, vehicle telemetry, surveillance timing, interlocked with the motive established through financial disputes. Still absent: direct DNA, weapon recovery, or eyewitness placing McGregor at the exact shooting location. Detectives prepared the case for submission to the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office. The prosecution's position centered on convergence: digital, forensic, and circumstantial evidence intersecting consistently around McGregor. The question wasn't whether the threads existed, it was whether they formed a rope strong enough to hold. August 29th, 2024. 47 days after the murders of Arkia Berry, Eric Ashley Jr., and Landon Brooks, the Jefferson County Courthouse became the next stage in the investigation. While no formal trial date had been set, the preliminary hearing functioned as a litmus test. It was the point where the district attorney's office needed to prove probable cause, demonstrate that Jacorian McGregor could be reasonably connected to the killings, even if the burden of proof for conviction remained further down the line. The prosecution entered the hearing armed with a layered evidence package. Forensic sequencing, digital footprints, and motive alignment were presented in structured order. The ballistics report was entered into record first. 27 shell casings recovered at the scene, all matching rifling characteristics consistent with a Glock pattern 9mm firearm. Although no weapon had been recovered, this provided the context for the attack's execution. Next came the digital evidence: cellular tower data, burner phone triangulation, and the melted SIM card fragment recovered from the burned Kia Soul formed the prosecution's backbone. The forensic technician testified regarding the SIM's partial IMSI match to the burner device that traveled from Echo Highlands Park to the outskirts where the vehicle was torched. This provided the physical link between the suspect's movement and the crime scene. The timeline reconstruction was methodical. Surveillance footage, automated license plate recognition, ALPR hits, and vehicle telemetry logged the green Kia Soul's movement through key locations, with timestamps aligning to the homicide window. The assistant district attorney emphasized the 2-hour gap where McGregor's primary phone went dark, coinciding with the burner phone and vehicle activity. Testimony from the financial investigator followed. They outlined Eric Ashley Jr.'s irregular cash withdrawals, the $2,000 pulled 2 days prior to the murders, and the deleted text messages referencing a planned meeting with McGregor's former number. A witness from Eric's social circle confirmed prior disputes between Eric and McGregor regarding money. Defense counsel countered predictably. They argued that all evidence presented was circumstantial. No eyewitness had placed McGregor at the scene. No DNA, no murder weapon. Defense framed the phone records and vehicle matches as insufficient, hinging their position on the legal standard that probable cause required more than indirect connections. The prosecution, in turn, leaned on convergence. Digital, forensic, and motive threads consistently pointed toward McGregor, even if each strand alone wasn't definitive. The assistant district attorney summarized, "This isn't a single thread, it's a cable. The suspect's vehicle, his phone, his financial disputes all intersect at the precise time and place this homicide occurred." For the presiding judge, the question wasn't about conviction, but about sufficiency. After 2 hours of evidence presentation, including cross-examination of the lead detective and forensic technicians, the court ruled that probable cause was established. The case would proceed to a grand jury for indictment consideration. This stage of the process functioned as a filter. It validated the strength of the investigative sequencing, confirmed that the evidence could sustain further legal scrutiny, and set the trajectory toward a formal trial. While the defense had outlined plausible doubt strategies, emphasizing absence of direct proof, the alignment of circumstantial elements held. Outside the courtroom, the homicide unit reviewed the judge's decision as procedural momentum, but remained focused on closing evidentiary gaps. The weapon's absence and the lack of DNA continued to be liabilities. The grand jury phase required careful presentation, and the unit prepared supplemental reports, refining their timelines and evidence chains. One detective noted in a follow-up debrief, "The weight's there, but we need to lock the pieces tighter. That gun's the missing link." With the hearing complete, attention shifted to finalizing the grand jury submission package, ensuring the case's structure remained intact through the indictment phase. September 2024. As the legal process moved toward the grand jury, Birmingham's Echo Highlands Park, once a quiet suburban pocket, became a focal point for conversations that extended far beyond the triple homicide. The murders of Arkia Berry, Eric Ashley Jr., and Landon Brooks had fractured the perception of safety in a community unaccustomed to this level of violence. Though the investigation focused on forensic and legal resolution, the broader public response formed a secondary layer to the case, one rooted in how a city absorbs the aftermath. The Birmingham Police Department released a formal statement confirming probable cause against Jacorian McGregor. While the investigation had not yielded a murder weapon or direct DNA evidence, the sequence of digital, ballistic, and testimonial evidence had been enough to sustain legal action. Media coverage amplified these facts, distilling complex forensic chains into headlines that spoke only of loss and unanswered questions. Community leaders, local clergy, and anti-violence organizations organized vigils. The largest was held outside the park where the murders occurred. Roughly 200 residents gathered, standing at the intersection of investigation and grief. The location wasn't arbitrary. It was the ground zero of the crime scene, a place that no longer felt neutral. The Birmingham Police Department attended, not in uniform, but as participants. The homicide unit's lead detective spoke briefly, providing measured updates on the case while avoiding trial-sensitive details. His remarks echoed the procedural facts, the suspect's movements, the forensic alignment, the pending legal process. Yet the focus remained on the victims. Forensics rarely reaches the public in full detail. However, the community's questions centered on how Arkia, Eric, and Landon became targets in what many perceived as random violence. Clarifications were made. This was not a case of mistaken identity, not a gang-related shooting, but a personal conflict that escalated to lethal violence. The financial dispute between Eric Ashley Jr. and Jacorian McGregor became the narrative thread that anchored public understanding. The fact that a child had been killed in the process deepened the outrage. Victim advocacy groups used the case to highlight systemic issues. Birmingham's local chapter of Mothers Against Gun Violence called for increased investment in conflict resolution programs, citing this case as evidence that disputes too often bypass mediation and escalate into homicide. A representative pointed to the patterns seen in the investigation: financial strain, informal debt, threats exchanged by text, as symptoms of unresolved community-level conflicts that law enforcement encounters too late. Simultaneously, city council members introduced proposals for expanded community safety infrastructure. While these moves were political, they reflected the broader impact the murders had on public discourse. Echo Highlands Park, once insulated from these conversations, now became part of the broader policy debate about firearm access, conflict mediation, and law enforcement responsiveness. Throughout September, Arkia Berry's name remained central. She was remembered as a mother and a hairstylist, someone who had no connection to criminal networks. Landon Brooks School held a memorial, where counselors facilitated sessions with his classmates to process the loss. Eric Ashley Jr.'s family organized a scholarship fund in his name, aiming to redirect the focus toward positive community engagement. For law enforcement, the public response offered both support and pressure. The homicide unit's case files remained open for continued evidence gathering, particularly around the search for the missing firearm. Leads came in sporadically, often from unverified sources, but the pattern was familiar. Public attention raises the stakes, but it also floods the system with noise. A secondary review of neighborhood surveillance footage was initiated, this time expanding the radius beyond Echo Highlands Park. Investigators revisited vehicle movement patterns to ensure no potential escape routes or witness opportunities had been missed. The expanded search, while procedural, reflected an acknowledgement that the community expected due diligence beyond the courtroom. Even without the missing weapon, the alignment of data points, telemetry, phone records, financial disputes, had stabilized the prosecution's case. Yet internally, the homicide unit knew that public confidence often hinges on tangible conclusions. In the absence of the firearm, the forensic narrative had to hold. Detectives continued to engage with the community in limited forums. They presented updates, clarified process timelines, and re-emphasized the weight of the forensic evidence in connecting McGregor to the crime. The procedural facts didn't erase the public's emotional responses, but they reinforced that the case had direction. One recurring question from residents focused on how these types of disputes escalate undetected until violence occurs. Investigators, bound by the limits of their scope, acknowledged the gaps between private conflict and public crime. The financial tension between Eric and McGregor hadn't crossed law enforcement's radar until it ended in homicide, a point that echoed in community discussions about early intervention. In this stage of the investigation, the procedural merged with the human. While the forensic data remained the foundation, the societal response underscored the broader consequences of the crime. The murders didn't just result in legal action, they altered the way a neighborhood engaged with issues of safety, conflict, and prevention. October 2024. The Jefferson County Grand Jury convened to review the homicide case against Jacorian McGregor. The prosecution presented the streamlined forensic framework, ballistic trajectories, digital tracking, vehicle telemetry, financial disputes, and the recovered SIM fragment. Each piece, though circumstantial in isolation, formed a cohesive chain. The grand jury returned an indictment on 3 counts of capital murder. The charges covered each victim individually, reflecting both the act and its scope. McGregor remained in custody without bond. No plea had been entered. The defense maintained their stance: absence of direct physical evidence, no recovered weapon, and no eyewitness placing McGregor at the scene. But procedurally, the case advanced toward trial. The community's engagement persisted. Memorial funds, policy initiatives, and anti-violence programs expanded. Law enforcement kept the investigation active, seeking the firearm to solidify the case. But the legal process moved forward with the evidence at hand. As the indictment closed the preliminary legal phase, the broader impact of the crime lingered. The investigation demonstrated that, in the absence of a single definitive proof, convergence of forensic layers can drive justice forward. At the end of this story, I'm left reflecting on the harsh reality that even personal disputes over money, pride, or broken trust can spiral into irreversible tragedy. In sharing this case with you, I hope it serves as a reminder that conflict, if left unchecked, can take more than just peace of mind. It can take lives. What do you think communities like ours can do to prevent these kinds of losses? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Whether you're from a big city or a small town, your voice matters. If this video resonated with you or made you pause, let me know where you're tuning in from. And hey, if you didn't connect with it, tell me why. Your feedback helps me grow. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more true crime stories that shed light on the hidden corners of our society.